The airport was alive with its usual chaos, an orchestra of muffled announcements, rolling suitcases, and hurried footsteps echoing off the polished tile floors. Amid the crowd, a young flight attendant named Emma stood at gate 24, her sharp uniform pressed to perfection. At just 27, she carried herself with the kind of confidence that only came with years of working under pressure. But behind her professional demeanor lay a brewing storm. Her morning had been a disaster. A late bus, a spilled coffee, and a stern warning from her supervisor had already left her teetering on the edge of frustration. As she took her place at the boarding desk, she forced a practiced smile, though her fingers gripped the boarding passes with more tension than usual. The line of passengers seemed endless. Families with restless children, business travelers glued to their phones, and tourists fumbling with oversized bags. Then, in the middle of it all, an older man stepped forward. His face was weathered, lined with the kind of stories only time could tell. He wore a simple leather jacket and jeans, his gray hair peeking out from beneath a baseball cap. To Emma, he was just another passenger. "Ticket and ID, please," she said, her voice clipped but polite. The man handed over his ticket with a quiet smile. She glanced at it, then back at him. There was a faint flicker of recognition in her mind, but the stress of the day quickly buried it. "Sir, you're in the wrong line," she said firmly. "This is for first-class passengers only." "I believe I am in the right line," the man replied calmly, his voice carrying a natural authority that made a few heads turn. Emma's patience, already frayed, snapped. She didn't have time for entitled passengers who couldn't follow basic instructions. Without another word, she took his ticket, ripped it in half, and dropped the pieces into the trash can beside her. "Next," she called, ignoring the murmurs of disbelief from the passengers behind him. The man didn't argue, didn't raise his voice. He simply stepped aside, a hint of amusement in his eyes, as if he knew something she didn't. And he did. Because Clint Eastwood wasn't just another passenger. He was the owner of the very airline Emma worked for. Before we get into today's story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. If you love stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. Now, let's get started. The hum of the airport faded into the background as Emma's hands shook slightly, her fingers still gripping the counter. The cool, sterile air around her felt too tight, suffocating even. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside her. But it didn't help. Her morning had already been a mess, and now she had just publicly humiliated a man who, in retrospect, might have been someone important. The weight of her mistake hit her like a ton of bricks, but it was too late to undo it. She glanced at her watch, just a few more hours until her shift would end, and she could finally go home. But even the thought of being away from this chaos didn't bring her comfort. No matter how far she went, the lingering sense of shame would follow her, gnawing at the edges of her mind. She could already hear the gossip from the other flight attendants, the jokes that would surely come at her expense. As the line of passengers continued to move, Emma found herself stuck in a loop of self-doubt. She couldn't shake the image of Clint Eastwood, standing there with his calm smile as she tore up his ticket. She had tried to brush it off, to convince herself it was just another passenger, just another mistake. But something told her this wouldn't be that easy to forget. She took another deep breath and forced herself to smile as the next passenger approached. "Ticket and ID, please," she said, her voice faltering only slightly. But deep down, a gnawing feeling crept up her spine. What if she'd just ruined her entire career? What if Clint Eastwood wasn't just a passenger? What if he was someone who could change her life, for better or worse? The next few hours passed in a blur, but Emma couldn't shake the feeling that someone, was about to change everything. She couldn't have known it then, but as the last passenger of the day approached the desk, her world was about to be rocked in a way she couldn't yet comprehend. Emma was still replaying the moment in her head when her supervisor, Linda, marched toward her with a look that could freeze lava. The crowd had thinned, and the shift was winding down, but the fire in Linda's eyes reignited Emma's simmering anxiety. Something was wrong. Very wrong. "Emma," Linda said in a hushed but sharp tone, leaning over the counter. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Emma blinked, feigning ignorance, though her stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" Linda's expression darkened as she glanced around to ensure no passengers were within earshot. "The man whose ticket you tore up. That wasn't just anybody. That was Clint Eastwood. Clint Eastwood, Emma. He owns this airline." The words hit her like a punch to the chest. For a second, she felt like the ground beneath her had disappeared. She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. She had heard the name, of course. Who hadn't? A Hollywood icon and now a business mogul. And she'd just humiliated him in front of dozens of people. "Linda, I didn't know," Emma stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "You didn't know?" Linda hissed, her voice dripping with disbelief. "You didn't recognize him? Emma, this could cost you your job. No, scratch that. This will cost you your job. Do you have any idea how many strings he could pull with a single phone call?" The weight of the situation was suffocating. Emma's chest tightened as her mind raced, grasping at straws for how to fix this. "Did he say anything? Did he leave?" "He didn't say much," Linda replied, her tone sharp and unforgiving. "But he's still here, and he's requested to speak with you. Personally." Emma's heart stopped. The idea of facing Clint Eastwood now, after everything, felt impossible. She could already picture his cold glare, the scorn in his voice, the final nail in the coffin of her career. But there was no escaping it. Linda gave her a curt nod toward the VIP lounge. "He's waiting for you. Now." Emma felt the eyes of her co-workers on her as she walked through the terminal, each step heavier than the last. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she approached the lounge's sleek glass doors. Behind them, Clint Eastwood sat calmly, his hat resting on the table beside him, his piercing eyes fixed on her as if he'd been expecting this moment all along. She hesitated for a second, her hand hovering over the door handle. Whatever was about to happen next, she knew it would either be the end of her career or the beginning of something she couldn't yet imagine. With a deep breath, she opened the door, stepping inside to face the man who now held her fate in his hands. Emma's palms were clammy as the glass door closed behind her with a quiet click. Clint Eastwood sat at the small lounge table, his posture relaxed, one hand casually cradling a cup of coffee. He didn't look angry, which only made it worse. That calm, steady demeanor felt like a storm waiting to explode. "Have a seat," he said, his voice low and gravelly, carrying the same commanding presence that had once captivated audiences on the big screen. Emma hesitated, then lowered herself into the chair across from him. She clasped her trembling hands in her lap, forcing herself to meet his gaze. His piercing blue eyes studied her, not with judgment, but with a quiet intensity that made her squirm. "I hear you've had quite the day," Clint began, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. I'm so sorry, Mr. Eastwood," Emma blurted out, her voice cracking. "I didn't realize who you were, and I shouldn't have reacted the way I did. He held up a hand, cutting her off mid-apology. "Relax," he said. "I'm not here to chew you out. I'm here to understand." "Understand?" Emma echoed, confused. Clint leaned back in his chair, taking a slow sip of his coffee before setting the cup down deliberately. "What made you do it? Tearing up my ticket like that? What was going through your mind?" Her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't the question she had expected. She thought he'd demand an explanation, not ask for her perspective. But the question forced her to confront the knot of emotions she'd been ignoring all day. I was frustrated," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's been a rough morning. I thought you were just another passenger trying to skip the line, and I let my emotions get the better of me. I wasn't thinking clearly." Clint nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Frustration," he repeated as if testing the weight of the word. "It can make us do things we regret later. I know that feeling well." Emma blinked in surprise. He didn't sound condescending. If anything, there was a flicker of understanding in his tone, as though he was speaking from experience. But then his gaze sharpened, cutting through her like a blade. "Tell me, Emma, do you think frustration justifies disrespect?" Her heart sank. "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "It doesn't. I made a mistake and I—" "Stop," he interrupted, leaning forward slightly. "This isn't about groveling or saving your job. It's about honesty. Be honest with yourself. Why did you snap? What's really going on?" The question hit deeper than she expected. Her mind raced, searching for an answer, but all she found was the chaos of the past few months. Long hours, sleepless nights, the constant pressure to be perfect. It all came rushing to the surface, threatening to spill over. I feel invisible," she admitted finally, her voice trembling. "Like, no matter how hard I try, no one notices. It's like I'm just here, doing my job, but I don't matter. And today, it all just broke me." Clint studied her for a long moment, his expression softening. "Invisible," he repeated, his voice quieter now. "That's a heavy thing to carry." Emma nodded, tears stinging her eyes. She wasn't sure why she was opening up to him, of all people. Maybe it was the way he listened, really listened, or the sense that he'd seen enough of life to understand. Clint leaned back again, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. "Let me tell you something," he said, his voice steady. "I've been in rooms full of people who know my name, but there were times I felt just as invisible as you do now. Recognition doesn't always fill the void." Emma stared at him, his words sinking in. She hadn't expected this conversation to turn so personal, but it felt like a lifeline. Clint's lips curved into a faint smile. "But there's a difference between being invisible and being unnoticed. The first one's a state of mind. The second, well, that can change." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Emma didn't fully understand what he was trying to say, but there was something in his tone, a challenge perhaps, that made her want to find out. "Tell me," Clint said, leaning forward again, "if you had the chance to be seen, to really be seen, what would you do with it?" The question struck a chord in Emma, igniting a spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. But as she opened her mouth to answer, she had no idea that Clint's next move would leave her completely speechless. Emma's pulse quickened as Clint's piercing gaze locked onto hers. His question lingered in the air like a riddle waiting to be solved. Before she could respond, Clint reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small leather notebook. He flipped it open, scanning the pages until he found what he was looking for. Then, with a deliberate motion, he slid it across the table toward her. Curious and apprehensive, Emma glanced down. Her eyes widened when she saw what was written, columns of names, notes, and positions. At the very top of the page, underlined, was the heading, Employee Evaluations. Emma's heart dropped. Is this about me?" she asked hesitantly, her voice barely audible. Clint nodded, leaning back in his chair. "Every so often, I like to observe my employees without them knowing who I am," he said matter-of-factly. "It's the best way to see how people really are, how they handle pressure, how they treat others. I was on this flight for exactly that reason." Her breath caught in her throat as his words sank in. This wasn't just about the ticket. He'd been watching her all along. "I'll admit," Clint continued, his tone neutral but firm, "tearing up my ticket wasn't exactly the best first impression." Emma's cheeks flushed with shame and she averted her gaze, bracing herself for what he'd say next. "But," he added, his voice softening, "it wasn't the only thing I noticed." Emma's eyes darted back to him, confusion and hope battling in her chest. "I watched you handle difficult passengers all day," Clint said. "I saw you smile when others would have snapped, stay patient when things were falling apart around you, and when you made a mistake, however big, you owned up to it. Do you know how rare that is?" Emma blinked, unsure if she'd heard him right. You're not angry. Clint chuckled softly. Angry? Number impressed? Maybe. He leaned forward again, his expression serious. You made a mistake, Emma, but mistakes don't define a person. How they handle them does. And you've shown me something I don't see often. A spark. You've got potential, but you're bearing it under frustration and doubt. Emma's breath hitched as he continued. So, Clint said, a sly smile playing on his lips, I've got a proposition for you. This airline needs more people like you in leadership positions. People who care, who understand what it's like on the front lines. I've got a program that identifies promising employees and trains them for management roles, and I want to offer you a spot. The room seemed to tilt as his words hit her. You want me? She stammered, her voice trembling with disbelief. Clint nodded, his expression unwavering. I don't make offers lightly, Emma, but I see something in you. The question is, do you see it in yourself? Her mind raced. Just an hour ago, she'd thought her career was over. Now, the man she'd humiliated was offering her a lifeline, a chance to rise above everything that had been holding her back. She started, her voice shaking. I don't know if I'm ready for something like that. Clint's eyes softened and he leaned back with a knowing smile. No one ever feels ready. But trust me, Emma, growth doesn't happen in comfort zones. Think about it. The door opened slightly and Linda peeked in, her face pale with worry. Mr. Eastwood, she said cautiously, your flight is boarding. Clint stood, adjusting his jacket. He turned back to Emma, his expression warm but commanding. This is your chance to step out of the shadows, Emma. Don't let fear hold you back. And with that, he tipped his hat, gave her a final nod, and strode out of the lounge, leaving Emma sitting there, her heart pounding. For the first time in a long time, she felt a spark of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel. Possibility. But the decision wasn't easy, and as she sat there, grappling with the weight of his offer, she knew the real battle was just beginning. Emma sat frozen in the lounge chair long after Clint Eastwood had left. His words echoed in her mind, their weight growing heavier with each passing second. Do you see it in yourself? The question wasn't just about a promotion. It was about everything she had been avoiding, every fear she had buried under her daily routine. Her fingers absent-mindedly traced the edge of the leather notebook Clint had left behind. She glanced at the names and notes inside, each one a snapshot of someone being noticed, someone being seen. It was a stark reminder of how little she had believed in her own worth. She exhaled shakily, her thoughts swirling. Could she really step into a leadership role? The idea was thrilling, but it also terrified her. What if she failed? What if Clint had overestimated her? But then another thought crept in, quieter but persistent. What if he's right? The airline staff began filtering back into the lounge, and Emma quickly tucked the notebook into her bag. She didn't need more whispers about what Clint Eastwood had said, or worse, pitying looks if they knew how close she had come to losing everything that day. As the day wore on, Emma couldn't focus. Every interaction with the passenger felt heavier, more meaningful. She noticed things she hadn't before, the tired eyes of a mother juggling two crying children, the quiet frustration of an elderly man fumbling with his boarding pass. For the first time in weeks, she didn't just see them as problems to fix. She saw people, each carrying their own invisible burdens. Later that evening, as she stood by the terminal window watching planes taxi on the runway, she thought about Clint's question again. If you had the chance to be seen, to really be seen, what would you do with it? Her phone buzzed in her pocket, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was an email from the airline's corporate office with the subject line, Leadership Program Opportunity. Enrollment deadline. 2 weeks. Emma's stomach twisted. The email confirmed Clint's offer was real. Attached was a detailed description of the program, outlining how it could help employees transition into management roles. It was everything she'd secretly wanted but had never dared to pursue. She stared at the screen, her thumb hovering over the reply button. Her heart raced with indecision. Could she really step into the unknown? Could she risk failing? Her thoughts drifted to Clint's parting words. Growth doesn't happen in comfort zones. She thought about how she had felt invisible, how she had let her frustrations define her. If she turned this down, wasn't she just letting fear win again? Taking a deep breath, Emma tapped the reply button and began typing. She hesitated only once before hitting send. The confirmation message blinked on her screen, and she felt a strange mix of exhilaration and dread. As she slipped her phone back into her pocket, she caught her reflection in the window. For the first time in a long time, she didn't look invisible to herself. But the journey wasn't over yet. There was still so much she had to prove. And as she turned to leave the terminal, she knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just about a job. It was about finally stepping into the person she was meant to be. 2 weeks later, Emma stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her neatly pressed blazer. It felt strange, almost surreal to see herself like this, polished, confident, and ready. She hardly recognized the woman staring back at her. The leadership program's orientation day had arrived, and Emma was about to walk into a room filled with people who, like her, had been selected for their potential. The self-doubt still lingered in the back of her mind, but it no longer had the power to paralyze her. As she made her way into the corporate training hall, she couldn't help but think about how far she had come in just a few short weeks. She had spent hours preparing, reading, and reflecting. She'd even reached out to a few trusted colleagues for advice and discovered that many of them had believed in her all along, even when she hadn't believed in herself. The program facilitator greeted Emma with a warm smile and handed her a name badge. "Welcome, Emma. We're excited to have you here," they said. Emma nodded, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride and nervous energy. The day unfolded with workshops and discussions, each designed to challenge their thinking and push them out of their comfort zones. Emma found herself speaking up during group exercises, her voice steady and sure. Each time she contributed, a little more of the old fear seemed to melt away. By the end of the day, Emma sat in a quiet corner of the hall, reflecting on everything that had led her to this moment. She thought about Clint Eastwood's words, about his ability to see something in her that she hadn't yet seen in herself. And then, it hit her. The lesson she had learned wasn't just about leadership or work. It was about recognizing her own value, even when things felt uncertain. It was about knowing that growth often came disguised as discomfort, and that mistakes didn't define her. They refined her. As she packed up her things, Emma glanced at the small notebook Clint had left her weeks ago, which she now carried as a reminder. She opened it one last time and noticed a note she hadn't seen before, scrawled at the very bottom of the page. "The sky's not the limit. It's just the beginning." Emma smiled, tucking the notebook away. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid of what lay ahead. She felt ready to rise, to lead, and to embrace the challenges ahead with the same resilience that had gotten her this far. As she walked out of the hall, the setting sun painted the sky in hues of gold and orange. It wasn't just a new chapter, it was a new story, one she was finally ready to write herself. Emma's story is a reminder that sometimes the biggest opportunities come from the moments we least expect, and often they're disguised as challenges. It's not about avoiding mistakes, but about how we rise after making them. Have you ever faced a moment where fear tried to hold you back from your true potential? What would you do if someone saw something in you that you hadn't seen in yourself? Let Emma's journey inspire you to take that leap, embrace the discomfort, and trust in your ability to grow. Share your own experiences in the comments below. We'd love to hear your story. And if this video moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need a little encouragement to step into their own greatness.